Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome now to the stage Michael Sherrill, the 2019 JRA Master of the Medium in Ceramic.
Well, I just want to thank the James Renwick Alliance for honoring me with this, and I feel like I'm in incredible company with my fellow artists, and awesome work, by the way. It was great. Let's see here if I can get to my show. There you go. Casper Frederick. So often, I live in the mountains of North Carolina, and it's had, it reflects the kind of life I had as a young person, where I felt like when I discovered clay in high school, there was this vast opening thing that I could work out the rest of my life and never really discover what was out there. And so for that sense of adventure, this photograph is there. This is the mountains where we live, and close to Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a guy that was drawn to the mountains as a kid. I grew up in North Carolina, born, by the way, up in New England, but raised in the South. There's the little saying, as an acorn is to the oak, so are we. And so I really feel like that's how my life has sort of been, is the sense of being a seed and coming and unfolding. Here's the little guy here. This is supposed to be nostalgic, so we're working on it. But this is me. This is a big part of my life, is the fact that I'm dyslexic and that I was a refugee in the art department. I mean, honestly, in my junior high and high school, my father, I'll show you pictures of those guys, but I basically could make stuff physically, but language was really tough for me. And these are this is the sun and the moon, those two women, my mother and my grandmother, who really held me in an orbit for my life growing up. Because I think being a little bit disjointed and being pushed to the back of a classroom can sometimes make people angry and act out. Well, I didn't, because those two women loved me too much to do that kind of stuff. My father raced motorcycles, as my brother would love to say, but he was an inventor and a tool maker. I grew up in his machine shop. My brother Bix got an MFA in art, lived in New York City, would go to lunch with Leo Castali, got to kind of be in the art scene in New York and eventually passed there. But he was the guy that, through art, through just dropping a pencil on a piece of paper, opened a whole world to me as a young kid. We're about 6 years difference in age. And my grandfather, he's got to be here because this man is the one who taught me about the natural world. My father was too busy making a living, and this man was working in a textile mill at the time, and he took me fishing and grew up on a farm. He made whiskey, and he told me about that kind of life. And that was always sort of this interesting thing. And it's made me into someone who looks out instead of looking in to indoors. I love indoors, but really I like the outdoors more. And then me as a young potter. So I moved to the mountains of North Carolina with nothing, just a couple $100 and some kiln brick and a potter's wheel, and luckily had friends that helped me find my way. I was doing salt glaze early on. The salt glaze was just, I didn't know what I was doing. There was nothing written much about Nelson Book of Ceramics, and had about a paragraph about this long. And not a lot of information, but I had friends, people like Cynthia Bringle, Tom Turner, who as a young artist, they kind of would help me a little bit and advise me. These steins here, early salt glaze. Go through this fairly fast. And this, I'm jumping over a lot of work. I mean, I worked in salt for probably about 15 years, along with other things. So I threw pots. I think I was very competent as a thrower, and it really was something that I used to further my work. But at the same time, you're getting ready to see where that's going to make a change. So I became a single dad, and these are my kids at the time. They're all grown up, and one of them's made me a grandfather several times over. And but New York City. But the thing that happened really different, my wife Marjorie, she's spread all over the scene here, so I'm embarrassing her. But we met at Penland while I was teaching, and she was there, and we kind of had this wonderful kind of walking courtship. But her coming into my life really, so my difficulties with, I was making stuff, but being able to make show deadlines on time and doing all the clerical stuff, that was not my cake. And so Marjorie was an incredible asset to sort of make it. That's when I started coming to Washington, D.C. and doing the Smithsonian Craft Show. Me and a couple of friends, we were getting on a regular basis, and that's how we've met a lot of friends here in the audience. So this work was done during that time period when I met Marjorie. I was basically teaching people who wanted to make functional work, so I did some of this work there. But this is, the work became more about this sort of archetype of a teapot. And I was fortunate enough to be making this. This is in the Renwick collection, along with a metallic piece that goes with it. But it was a time where teapots had an incredible swelling because of Garth Clark and his book, and then Leslie Farron and her book as well. It really was an underpinning and making a living. I mean, being an entrepreneur as an artist, that's a big part of my life, was how do I survive? And being able to use your talent as at the edge of your art and still make a living. That was always that little moment. So I don't teach, I don't have a university degree. I'm a practicing artist from the age of 18 or 19 years old. There's me with some bottles inspired by some of the North Carolina Moravian pots that were done. This big old purple stuff. But the White House bottles, that was, one of my favorite stories is the fact that I had shown at a show with this work and had great success at this show, and took this new work, and I didn't sell one piece. Not one piece. And then I came to Baltimore. The economy had done a downturn, and I was at Baltimore, and Michael Monroe walks by, and Michael says, "Michael, I've got something going on. I'd like those bottles for that." And that's the White House collection right there. And so it was a real important moment for me, because it taught me that it's not that my work was wrong, but sometimes I had to realize that my audience was not necessarily where I lived, and it was broader than that. This is, I was informed a little bit by this work, for instance, by shaker spindles. These are thrown in altered pieces. They're quite large, just to give you a sense of scale. What is and what isn't tea. My wife Marjorie is the gilder. So this big door here is my new studio. So I worked for a long time in a house I built and studio, and about 22 years ago we built this big studio. And so the natural world really came inside the door. This has a great connection to the Smithsonian. When I was 18 or 19, I came to see at the East Wing of the National the big cutout show of Matisse's. And I left there with this impression of chewing the cud. Why was that interesting? And it's been an echo in my life for a long time, just a connection. And then Fleur de Lis. So this taking the same kind of throwing, altering, making stuff, and this work is non-functional totally. It's just a piece of sculpture. But I made this, and this is the watershed, because I turned around and I made this out of porcelain back into high temperature again. And it's using sort of this abraded surface where I'm working through material, I'm putting layers of color and working back through. A lot of this work is sandblasted and then polished, so I'm borrowing from the glass people here. There's a little bit of coal working kind of mentality that came into the work. Corona Spinora, thanks to and bumbleberry. These are all long, built on a spine. So early rhododendron. And this is a piece that the Smithsonian was up at the Smithsonian, is traveling in my current retrospective. And this gives you a sense of the material itself, about how I'm carving back in, fabricating. And a lot of stuff is, at this point, is forged and added to fabricated. Fabricating means working out of stock material, is the way I do it. But this is porcelain and, at this point, iron. So a big part of our life was moving down to Ott and Elma, who were our next door neighbors. They've since passed. But there's Elma. This is my son Micah, who's a painter, and he did a portrait of her. And she connected me with all the common names of the plants around us. This is called Elma's weed. And this was Elma to a T. I mean, she was colorful, wonderful. She was my second mother in many ways. And Oscar, they both did subsistence farming. And Oscar Avery here, and he kept apples, and he pruned them so lovely and beautiful. And after his failing health and then his death, all the apple trees are dying for the lack of his love and his care, which is a powerful moment for me. A lot of my work ties into that idea of things that happen. Toolmaker, and I started a company on the side called Mud Tools, and that's been good for our family. It's leveled out my life and my income and allowed me to spend more time making more serious work. I've done some large projects. This is one that I did for Bank of America. That's Hoss Haley on the top, by the way, if you all know Hoss. And there's finished piece. This piece is in the Temple of Cool Beauty, bronze, plainwork glass, and porcelain. And I'll just go through these a little fast. And Kohler. I'm down to my 1 minute. I'm shaking some enamel on objects. And here are some of the objects I did while at Kohler. Little flower bloom forms. Piece called Flourish. Jules Vernium. A large piece I did for a project in Charlotte. And we're just about there. Working in colored clay, and I'm working sort of like in a Marini style. And so that's how I'm achieving some of this, but I'm cutting things linearly down the clay strata, and it just reveals this incredible depth of color. This is Kind Floors piece. It's called Black Medicine, and then we're closing in on the very end. This is Dutch Solomon. And this piece is called Remnant, and it's about this broken or tragedy. And the very last piece is called A Beautiful Death. And I just finished this at Star. If you don't know about Star, it's in North Carolina. Every year they do Fire Fest. So this is about a 7-foot tall piece that they fire and then open the kiln, and we're pumping sawdust into it. That's what we're doing. So I'm a 64-year-old man having the time of my life like I was 12. Thank you.